This is an action item, so I will look for a motion from the board.
I move the Board of Education of Wall County School District 6 approve the consolidated application and authorize the board president to sign the application on their behalf.
Second.
Do we have discussion on the topic? Any questions? Ms. Van Soest? Mr. Hall?
Yeah, got a couple questions, Mr. Van Soest. Who requires the set-asides and who determines those amounts?
The federal government requires those set-asides under the law, and the amounts are set, it depends on the area. The minimum requirement under parent involvement is 1% of the Title I allocation. We generally at least double that amount. The amount for homeless education is based on what our needs might be, and we set aside about $40,000 to $50,000 a year for that purpose. And then the school choice is based, and SES are both based on previous years and how much we have needed. At one time, and under No Child Left Behind, we were required to set aside 20% of Title I for that purpose. But in recent years, we had enough history to see how much of that we would spend, and so they have allowed us to reduce those down. And through the waivers, we are now able to not spend them on tutoring companies that would come in and have our kids come to them, but rather determined by our own parent groups on what would make a difference within our school district for our students. So we no longer have to set aside the 20%. However, we set aside almost $300,000 in order to meet that obligation.
Well, I just wonder, because if you kind of do a rough figure on the 6 required set-asides, that's almost 25% of your budget.
Yes.
Which seems like an awfully top-loaded assistance program to me, when 20 to 25% of the funds that come in are required for administration purposes, which most of those are, the way it looks to me, as it's worded anyway. It just seems like that is a pretty high percentage for administration.
The administration is not that high. The indirects is about 5.6%. Then the administration costs are minimal. The parent involvement is around a little over 100,000, and that I wouldn't consider administration. And the SES and school choice are in addition, then I would not consider them administration either. They're for direct services for students.
Okay, well, it just seems like a lot of money out of the pot to set aside that really doesn't seem to be producing what it should. But anyway, that's just surface view.
Dr. Richard?
The set-asides, like for parent engagement, though, we've heard good reports from parents about, and from schools and school leaders about the kinds of activities that those funds allow them to do, to be able to bring in parents for math nights and reading nights, so that those parents are better able to work with their students. So the parent engagement piece, that set aside has been really effective. I've heard lots of good things there, as well as, and you can probably speak to those other set asides and the impact that they have on students.
Right, those are things that were required with the accountability measures within this law. And the hope was to provide targeted direct services for those schools that were on priority improvement and turnaround primarily. I'm just thankful that they're not as high as they used to be.
Well, I think maybe the question to ask is if they weren't set-asides, would you be spending the money the same way you're spending the money now? And that would probably tell us whether or not they're meaningful set-asides or they're wasteful set-asides.
Unnecessary.
Yeah, so maybe you may or may not be able to answer that question, but if the set-asides weren't there, would you be spending the money in a similar way, or would you have a better allocation for those resources?
Yes, under SES, which is the largest set-aside, we spend the money on an additional interventionist for schools on priority improvement. We spend it on the summer program, and we spend it on the after-school program. And so we've only been able to do that in the last 2 years. Before that, we were giving it away to tutoring companies, which some of them were very good and some of them were not as effective as we had hoped. So we're happy with spending that additional money for those schools that need that additional support to get to where we would like them to be.
Ms. Solis?
I just want to thank you for your outreach to parents. I think that's such a huge piece that sometimes we miss, is making sure that parents feel involved, get involved, and stay involved, and feel like they're part of the process. So thank you for your outreach to parents.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is an action item. Ms. Barea, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Haefele,
Aye.
Mr. Hall,
Aye.
Mr. Lydiak,
Aye.
Dr. Richard,
Aye.
Mr. Richardson,
Aye.
Mrs. Solis,
Aye.
and the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you very much. Our next item, we do have a few revisions to policy. A number of them coming forward here. Presenting is Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Stacy Daddery, and this is revisions to policy AED.
Thank you once again. There is, much like you can see in your board packet, you can see the current policy with revisions as the first page in this section, and then the final policy. And just to say a few words in terms of what you're seeing, and I'm sure it's very understandable, the recommendations are really to cut out quite a bit of the wording that is really just restating what is in law around the specific minimum accreditation contracts, that what the accreditation contract must address. So the intent is to make it simpler, less, not redundant in terms of what is in state law already.
This is an action item. Do we have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education of Weld County School District 6 approve the revisions to policy AED accreditation as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there a discussion from the board? Ms. Barea, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Haefele,
Aye.
Mr. Hall,
Aye.
Mr. Lydiak,
Aye.
Dr. Richard,
Aye.
Mr. Richardson,
Aye.
Mrs. Solis,
Aye.
and the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is revisions to policy DEA, funds from local tax sources, and to present is Chief Financial Officer Megan Sponsler.
Good evening, Mr. Richardson, Mr. Eads, and members of the board. Tonight I'm bringing forward a revision to policy DEA, funds from local tax sources. House Bill 14-1314 encourages local districts and their charter schools to work together to provide charter schools with mill levy override funds. Districts must now include a charter school representative in any committee formed by a school district to assess and prioritize the school district's needs for operating revenues and to consider seeking additional local revenues. The revisions to the policy reflect that change. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
This is an action item.
I move that the Board of Education of Weld County School District 6 approve the revisions to policy DEA, funds from local tax sources as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the topic? Chatty crowd tonight. Okay, Ms. Barea, roll call vote.
Mr. Haefele,
Aye.
Mr. Hall,
Aye.
Mr. Lydiak,
Aye.
Dr. Richard,
Aye.
Mr. Richardson,
Aye.
Mrs. Solis,
Aye.
and the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you. I think you get one more. Item number 4 is revisions to policy DEB, loan programs, funds from state tax sources. And again, Ms. Sponsler, you're presenting.
Thank you. Policy DEB, loan programs, is being revised to reflect another statutory change as required by Senate Bill 14-202. This bill expanded the Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency for Schools loan program to provide school districts with loans for renewable energy projects and efficient buses. In the past, it was just limited to energy efficient buses in the event that districts are unable to secure private financing.
Do we have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education of Walt County School District 6 approve the revisions to policy DEB, loan programs, funds from state tax sources as presented.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Ms. Brea, roll call vote.
Mr. Haefele?
Aye.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Lydiak?
Aye.
Dr. Richard?
Aye.
Mr. Richardson?
Aye.
Mrs. Solis?
Aye.
And the motion carries 6-0.
Thank you very much. Item 5 is revisions to policy GBGAB. That's a tongue twister. First aid training coordinator of school leadership, Bob Billings, is presenting.
Superintendent Eads, Vice President Richardson, members of the board, thanks for letting me come and talk about this change to policy. This is already in practice in our district, but recent legislation, Colorado Revised Statute 22-125.5, changed the requirement by law that included not only first aid and CPR training, but included training for AEDs. We already do that with all of our coaches, and so this is just upping our policy to come in line with the revised statute. So you have the current policy with revisions and then the final policy. We also, because we think it's the right thing to do, will include volunteer coaches in this training, and we'll pay for them because they are volunteer if they use our health services through the district. We think it's important that they're also trained even as a volunteer. Be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education of Weld County School District 6 approve the revisions to policy GBGAB, first aid training, as presented.
Second.
Thank you for presenting. Mr. Hall, do you have a question?
Mr. Billings, how many AEDs do we have in each building?
I don't know district-wide how many. At our high schools with regard to athletics, our athletic trainers have one on their person at events, and then there's one that is in each of the buildings as well. So that's where the highest level of participation and widespread use, so they're readily available. I can't speak for the elementary level, because I'm just not as familiar with that related to activities.
Okay. It's an important device.
Any further discussion? It's funny, so our CPA was up at in Glenwood Springs working at the hot springs, and happened to walk out to a gentleman having a heart attack, and got the paddles and revived him. So it's amazing what having those devices handy can save people's lives. So we appreciate. I know that was over the last 2 years has been a big effort to put those into the schools, and it's much appreciated.
Yeah, this was a result of a situation that happened over at Thompson Valley High School where a student collapsed and was saved. And so the parents brought forth this idea to legislators and resulted in this change. Definitely a good thing.
Mr. Hall?
One more thing. I'm sure we probably do, but just for my information, I mean, we've got almost 1,100 teachers in the district, and I don't know what the total number is when you count the classifieds that are on, and put classifieds, non-classifieds, and everybody that would be together. Any feel for how many folks we have qualified in the building during, or in each building on a normal day, so that you know, if there's only one device and there's only one person qualified, that doesn't do us a lot of good.
Yeah, so each building has a list of people that are trained in first aid CPR and have the AED certification. So
Okay.
that's something that exists as part of a safety plan at each building.
Good. Thank you. Thanks.
Mr. Lydiak?
Mr. Billings, can you touch on the program that was so generous to help us get these AEDs in, the Angel, the Banner Health grant or effort? Do you know what I'm?
I don't know specifically, and I'm not going to make something.
Because we didn't have to buy.
Some other people do.
I think Mr.
Right, we
Reed-
didn't have to buy these, but these were actually
Right.
gifted to us.
But many of them
so-
donated to our schools. I think
Here comes help.
Thank
It
you.
was over a period
Who's
of
got my
time.
back?
we're going deep into the memory vault on that one. Yeah.
Well, I just want you to know, the whole story behind the AEDs and how we got
So yes, 2 years ago now, Banner Health and their foundation provided an AED at every one of our schools in our district, including charter schools. And so our staff installed those, and we have a long list of people that are trained now. All of our CPR training in the district comes with AED training. It's a requirement of CPR now. And they are in a location that is very close to a central location of the office generally, so that we can be ready. Our drivers of ambulances, they can't come into our schools and maintain and put new batteries in our systems every year as a part of that, and so we're really pleased about that. We will be getting one in our administration building, in our facilities building, and in our service center soon this year.
That's exactly what I was going to say, but you said it better. Not really.
Good job, Mr. Billings.
Thank you for presenting and for your deep knowledge. No further questions. Ms. Brea, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Haefele?
Aye.
Mr. Hall?
Aye.
Mr. Lydiak?
Aye.
Dr. Richard?
Aye.
Mr. Richardson?
Aye.
Mrs. Solis?
Aye.
And the motion carries 6-0.